the first Sunday of August. That date may not hold great significance to you, may not be marked on your calendar, but it's marked on my calendar. It has great significance to me and Deidre. Today marks the anniversary, 1 year anniversary of our first Sunday at Bumby. Time flies. Been a quick year in a lot of ways, maybe a long year for y'all. But I just wanted to mark this occasion by expressing our sincere love and appreciation for you. We don't say it enough, but we think it a lot. We love you for your faith. We love you for your fellowship with us. We love you for welcoming us into your home and into your church, and putting up with us and being patient and encouraging and uplifting us this first year. We want you to know that you're in our thoughts often and our prayers always. I looked up the chart of gifts for anniversaries. And if I read it right, the first anniversary, the gift is pie. I think that's what it said. But again, it's so good to be a part of this group, and we're so thankful for you inviting us and welcoming us and loving us. And we look forward to our labors together in the Lord. I remember my very first public speaking engagement. I remember it like it was yesterday. I was in the 3rd grade. It was a Thanksgiving Day play. And for whatever reason, I was selected as the narrator to the play. I can remember my nerves. I can still see the drops of sweat and maybe a few tears dropping onto the blue ink of that mimeographed sheet of paper that I was reading from. And I can remember the nerves and the butterflies. Because when we rehearsed this, the gym was empty. But now as I look up from that lectern, the gym is absolutely full. Everybody's looking at me and what I'll say. And I was fully convinced that they were looking at me just waiting for me to mess up so they could laugh. But I'll never forget when I first looked up from that sheet of paper, sitting in the very front row of that gymnasium was Mr. Burleson, the principal. And he looked me in the eye, grinned, and winked. And it was all okay after that. That one little gesture of encouragement got me through that harrowing evening. And now, 43 years later, I still remember that little grin and wink of encouragement. You probably have similar experiences in your life in which somebody said or did something that might have been just a passing gesture, but the meaning and the encouragement behind that meant so much to you that it stayed with you to this day. The Apostle Paul in the book of 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 gave these instructions to those Christians. And they've been preserved as instructions for us. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 11, he says, "Therefore, encourage each other and edify one another, just as you're also doing." Encourage and edify one another. It might surprise you, but then again, maybe it wouldn't, to know how many times those two words are mentioned in the New Testament. Encourage and edify. How many times they're enjoined upon us as Christians as our responsibility to one another. Encourage one another. The word encourage simply means to instill courage, to instill inspiration and hope. Edify one another. The word edify simply means to build one another up. It's a figurative expression of strengthening and emboldening one another to do the work that God has given us to do. Encourage one another. Do you recognize that your encouragement, the encouragement that you might give to someone through some grand gesture or even through some small grin and a wink, might be the courage, the inspiration, the example that they need to get through that day? To get through that day with their faith intact. This morning, let's talk about the all-important subject of mutual encouragement. Let's talk about the importance of encouragement. Encouragement is important because regular encouragement is absolutely vital to the Christian spiritual life and growth. I don't know that we can emphasize that enough, of how absolutely essential encouragement is to our spiritual life. We need encouragement. Look over in the book of Hebrews, chapter 3. The book of Hebrews was written to a group of Christians who were on the precipice of losing their faith. They were about to turn their backs upon Christ and in so doing lose their soul. And to that group, to that audience, the author says this in Hebrews chapter 3. Hebrews chapter 3 verse 12, he says, beware. The warning is issued. Beware, brethren, lest there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God. The warning was, you better beware. Beware lest you lose your faith and turn your back upon God. That's the warning cry. The answer, the antidote is in the next verse, Hebrews 3 verse 13. But exhort one another daily, while it is called today, lest there any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. Do you see the juxtaposition of that dire warning of them losing their faith? And right next to it, the antidote is exhort one another. Encourage, edify one another. There's the answer to apostasy. The answer to losing our faith is the mutual encouragement, the daily mutual encouragement of one another. The Hebrew writer understood the absolute essentiality of spiritual encouragement. Without encouragement, we cannot grow. Without encouragement, we cannot live spiritually. This spiritual strength, this spiritual encouragement is doubly vital when we recognize that the spiritual strength of each individual Christian solely determines the spiritual makeup and strength of a local congregation. Because a church is nothing more than the people. And a church is nothing more than the sum of its parts. And if we have a discouraged, spiritually weak Christians, then we have a discouraged, spiritually weak church. But a thriving, living church is always made up of strong, spiritually vibrant Christians who are the way they are because they're encouraged to be that way. And so the spiritual strength of each individual Christian will determine the spiritual life and the growth of the local church. Spiritual encouragement is important because the encouraged encourage. The Scriptures paint this idea, this concept of encouragement as a mutual edification society. I'll encourage you if you in turn will encourage me. And I'll be encouraged by the encouragement that you give, and in return, I'll be able to encourage you. Look in Romans chapter 1. Paul used this idea. Paul told the saints in Rome that I'm coming to see you. And Paul says in Romans chapter 1, verses 11 and 12, I'm coming to see you so that I may impart something. Paul says, I'm going to be a giver. I'm going to give you something. But then Paul says, I'm going to be a recipient as well. Look what he says in Romans 1, verses 11 and 12. For I long to see you, that I may impart to you some spiritual gift, so that you may be established. That is, that I may be encouraged together with you by the mutual faith of you and me. Do you see the mutual edification society Paul's talking about there? I'm going to come and impart some spiritual gift to you, and I'll be encouraged by the mutual faith of both you and me. The encouraged encourage. If you see the need for encouragement in your spiritual life, one question remains: who is going to encourage those that will encourage you? And the answer is, you will. God put us together for this purpose. Because He understood, in fact, He put within us the importance of spiritual encouragement. And so the command, the admonition of Paul, therefore encourage each other and edify one another, as you're also doing, becomes all more important. In fact, let's talk about the sources of encouragement. Broadly speaking, I think there's three. Number one is God. The Apostle Paul speaks of God. Are you still in the book of Romans? In Romans chapter 15. God is known by various descriptions in the Scriptures, but most of those descriptions speak to action, speak to something God does for us. And that's true in Romans chapter 15. Look in verse 5. Now may the God of patience and encouragement grant you to be like-minded toward one another according to Christ Jesus. The God of patience, the God of comfort, or your translation may say the God of patience and encouragement. The ultimate source of encouragement is God. Every source of encouragement that we might find ultimately comes and exists because God has placed it there. Prayer is a source of encouragement. Prayer is a communication to God that carries with it a secondary benefit to know that we have trust in God. Peter said, "Cast your cares upon Him, for He cares for you." This is not the primary purpose of prayer, but there's a psychological byproduct to prayer. Cast your cares upon Him. What a wonderful thought to know that God cares and listens to my prayer. What an encouragement to know that I can lay everything, every burden in front of that altar. The Scriptures. Are you still in Romans 15? He said there in verse 5, may the God of patience and comfort, but back up one verse to verse 4. For whatever things were written before were written for our learning, that through the patience and encouragement of the Scriptures we might have hope. that couplet of words, patience and encouragement of the Scriptures, then in verse 5 he says, now may the God of patience and encouragement, the God of all patience, the God of all encouragement, has given us the words of encouragement and patience. And God has given us something else, another source of encouragement. That's the main thrust of our lesson this morning, is each other. You know, God made us. And so who better to know our makeup? God made us social beings. The saying that no man is an island unto himself simply means that we need one another. Oh, I guess it's theoretically possible for someone to find a Bible laying around somewhere and on their own read and come to a knowledge of what they need to do in order to be saved. And to find someone to administer baptism and for that person to live their entire life faithful to God as the only Christian that they know. I guess in theory that's possible. But I'm so glad that I don't have to try that experiment. Because God knew that I needed someone. I thank God for the sources of encouragement that He's given to me. And so I thank God for you and the encouragement that we have in our mutual faith, both you and I. I guess the question is, how are you doing as an encourager? Keith Miller, in his book, The Passionate People, describes beautifully the two types of people that are in our lives. He calls them balcony people and basement people. He says in everybody's life there's basement people and balcony people. He says basement people are those discouragers. They're the people that will always bring you down. That for every solution they have a problem. That for every suggestion they have a reason why it'll never work. They are a wall and an obstacle to growth. He calls those people basement people. And he says those basement people are always pulling you down and trying to drag you into their misery and their discouragement. But he says life also is made up of what he called balcony people. He says those balcony people are the people that are always there cheering you on. Who are always saying, you can do it. I believe in you. You see, Mr. Burleson was a balcony person. In that grin and that wink, he was telling that nervous, knock-kneed third grader, you got this. And balcony people are always trying to pull you up and trying to encourage you. The Apostle Paul, was he a basement person or a balcony person? Oh, he lived in the balcony. So many times after scathing rebukes in which he would correct people, he would turn right around and say, but we're convinced of better things concerning you. What was he saying? You need to fix this, 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 and this. You got that wrong, you got that wrong. That's dead wrong. But I have faith in you. You can do this. Gut check time. Be honest. Are you a balcony person? Or are you a basement person? Are you applauding others when they do that which is right? Are you encouraging them in their faith? And there's a lot of ways that we can do this. We can encourage by our example. Look what Paul said, that balcony person who tried to help Timothy to be a balcony person, when he said in 1 Timothy chapter 4. 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 12, he says, famously said, "Let no one despise your youth, but be an example." Be an example to the believers in word, in conduct, in love, in spirit, in faith, and in purity. One of the greatest ways that you can be a balcony person, that you can encourage your fellow Christians, is by example, living the life yourself. You can be an encouragement just by your presence. Don't ever diminish what just your physical presence can mean. Do you remember the story of Job? Job in the side classroom, and they'll come to this point in the book of Job where Job has been afflicted horribly with the 2 worst days of his life. And you remember those 3 friends come to him. Now we remember those 3 friends for those cycle of speeches where they're very little help. But if they'd have stopped before then, it says in Job chapter 2, verse 11, "Now when Job's 3 friends heard all the adversity that come upon him, each one came from his place, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, for they made an appointment together to come and mourn with him and to comfort him. And when they raised their eyes from afar, they did not recognize him. And they lifted their voices and wept. And each one tore his robe and sprinkled dust upon his head toward heaven. So they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him. For they saw that his grief was very great." Oh, if they could have just stopped there. They sat there for a solid week. Are you awake? They sat there for a solid week and didn't say a word. A feat, women would say, that can only be accomplished by a man. But what sources of encouragement? Just by being there. I struggle with this. I don't always know what to say. Someone's loved one has passed. What do I say? Visit someone in the hospital. I don't know what to say. Sometimes the best thing I can think of is, "I hope you don't die." But don't ever diminish the value and the encouragement of just being there. And maybe in my case, you'd be better off not to say anything. Just be there. Think of the times in your life when you were in the hospital or when a loved one of yours died. You probably don't remember what somebody said to you, but you remember them coming and being with you. Your presence means a lot. Your presence in the assembly means so much to those who may be fighting spiritual struggles that you have no idea. But you come and you sit by them. You sing with them and pray with them, study with them. And that little grin and a wink may be what they needed to get through that week. Lastly, you can encourage people by your words. In the book of Ephesians, chapter 4, Paul gives us a choice. And the choice is obvious. What type of speech is going to come out of our mouths? Ephesians 4, verse 29, he says, "Let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good, for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers." No corrupt speech, but good words. Don't diminish the value of your word. The tongue is a powerful weapon. It can be used for destruction. It can start wars. It can destroy families. But it can also create relationships. It can sustain faith. And it can encourage the weak. Just some small statement of encouragement. Just a little note, written and mailed or emailed or tweeted or whatever you want to do, might be the difference between life and death. God gives Himself as a means of encouragement. In fact, He's the God of patience and encouragement. God's given us one another. There's one other source of encouragement that I want you to be aware of and to take advantage of. The Apostle Paul told the Philippian brethren, "Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling." He didn't mean apart from God, certainly. He didn't even mean apart from one another. Paul just said, "I can't be with you right now." And so there comes a time when you have to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. Not discounting the other vitally important sources of encouragement, but don't discount this one as well. Encourage yourself. Avail yourself of every means and opportunity of encouragement that God has afforded you. Do so richly. Immerse yourself in the Word of God. Engulf yourself in prayer and involve yourself deeply in the work of the local church. And in so doing, work out your own salvation in fear and trembling. Encourage yourself that you can live the life of a Christian faithful unto death. I love you. I want what's best for you. If you need somebody to encourage you, somebody to believe in you, somebody who would give their all so that you might have a home with God in heaven, you have that. Not in me, not in this church, but you have that in God Himself. And in Jesus Christ, who gave His life to encourage your life. Would you become a Christian this morning? What better time? You are surrounded by people who will be your balcony people if you'll give your life to Christ this morning. Maybe you've done that, but you've been pulled down into the basement by life, maybe by others. Again, a balcony of people are encouraging you to do what is right and to render obedience to the gospel this morning. Do you believe? in God and in Jesus Christ? Will you confess that before men? Will you turn your back on sin, and will you be baptized for the remission of your sins? We encourage you to take that step this morning. Would you encourage us by your obedience to the gospel? Let it be known, if we can help you in any spiritual way, right now as together we stand and as we sing.